It's Sunday afternoon again. Question in the chat, can you time out wrenches? No, you can't. And hopefully you'd never have to. If there's a problem, you'll have to private message me or something or get my attention. But yeah, hosting a live stream, you do have superpowers. You can ban, block, wrench, de-wrench, whatever you want to do because it's your channel. Good to see everybody here. And last time we finished up our feeble attempt at looking at all four Gospels at once. And yeah, the thing about wrenches, just real quick, is only if you really know what you're doing, you can time somebody out if they cause trouble, but not another wrench person. If it's a non-wrench, you can do that. But hopefully no bannings unless it's really obvious. But anyway, yeah, last time we went over we finished up the Gospels, and I decided since then, and even before that, I've been working on various timelines for the final week that Jesus was immortal. And it's way more complicated than even I thought before. And I had done a chart like 10 years ago on all this, and decided it needed more looking into. So, and the only thing, maybe next time I'll work on getting this silly chat to scroll by itself instead of me having to do it. So, anyway, greetings everyone. Thanks for coming, and we'll get into this. What we have here is a giant puzzle, and if we have time, I can read through these references later. We have a bunch of these in the Old Testament, which I can just click on real quick and show you that, where I'm getting this stuff. And the thing we want to emphasize or pay attention to here, looking at the Old Testament, is the Old Testament only ever calls the seventh day of the week the Sabbath. But by description, there are other days, such as annual Sabbaths, or we call them Sabbaths, that are days of no work. So the weekly Sabbath is a day of no work. There are other days during the year that are also days of no work. And in time, the Pharisees or whoever decided you couldn't travel more than about a mile on a no work day as well. So that's a kind of an important thing. But in the New Testament, it does use the term Sabbath for those non-work days, even if they're not the seventh day of the week. Timing is a big part of context, okay? So the first month of the year, you can see here this is Exodus 12, is the month of Aviv or Nisan, depending on the time and preference. And that's about mid-March to mid-April on our calendar. So that was to be the first month of the year. And on the 10th day, they would take a lamb for each family, each household, watch it until the 14th, and then slaughter those lambs at twilight, which is literally between the evenings, which doesn't mean sometime during 24 hours. It means between when the sun sets and when there's no more light left. That's between the evenings, okay? Hope everybody's keeping up so far. Between the evenings is twilight. Then they take some of the blood and smear it on the door frames, and that night, so after sundown, after the light's gone, they eat the meat. Okay, and then they say, there's descriptions here on being ready to go somewhere. It is the Lord's Passover. So the 14th day of the month is the Lord's Passover. Doesn't say it's a non-work day. Okay? Doesn't say that. But every non-work day was preceded by a preparation day. So whenever you see the term preparation or preparation day, you know that the day following that is a no-work day, whether it's a weekly Sabbath or not. Okay, we're just establishing our terms in the Old Testament, and then we're going to see how things got a little murky over time, even by the time that Jesus came. Okay, and then we have, in that same context, says this is a day to commemorate for generations, a festival. For 7 days you are to eat bread made without yeast. On the first day, remove the yeast from your houses. So that's the Feast of Unleavened Bread. When does it start? Does it start on Passover, the preparation for that? Or does it start the next day, the 15th? Okay, and Passover is where the death angel passed over any house that had the blood of the lamb smeared on the doorframe. That's why God himself called it the Passover. So no, it means the death angel passed them by because they were faithful and trusted God, that if they did this with the blood of the lamb, then that household would be passed over by the death angel. So the death angel would not take their firstborn. Okay. Then this festival of unleavened bread, because on that very day I brought your divisions out of Egypt. So it didn't happen on the preparation, it happened on the actual day of Passover, which was that night. So it gets complicated, and we'll see that a little bit more later. Anyway, that's the Feast of Unleavened Bread. The Passover begins at twilight. Remember what that means. On the 14th day of the first month, very specific in Leviticus 23. On the 15th day of that month is the Lord's Festival of Unleavened Bread. So it starts on the 15th, lasts for 7 days. On the first and last day are sacred assemblies or holy convocations, which means a no work day. Okay? And then the first fruits. When you enter the land I'm going to give you, you reap its harvest, speaking to Israel specifically, bring to the priest a sheaf of the first grain of your harvest. He is to wave the sheaf before the Lord so it will be accepted on your behalf. The priest is to wave it on the day after the Sabbath. Okay? In that time when it was written, there was only one day called Sabbath, but in time a bunch of other days were called Sabbath too. And so disputes arose over time about whether that meant only after the weekly Sabbath in the Feast of Unleavened Bread, or whether it meant the first no-work day in the Feast of Unleavened Bread. That was a question even by Jesus' time. Okay, the Lord's meaning it's holy to God. So, and then the Festival of Weeks. From the day after the Sabbath, the day you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, that is to say first fruits, count off 7 full weeks. Count off 50 days up to the day after the 7th Sabbath. So 7 times 7 is 49. So including the day makes it 50. So we have a bunch of things. These are all the spring feast, right? So sacred assembly, no regular work on the first fruits. Anyway, lots of passages here that say the same thing, right? How do we know what day came first of what? I'm not sure what your question is. Anyway, hopefully more things will be answered as we go along. But there will be more questions too. Now we have New Testament references. I'll look at those later because I've got a few of them highlighted down here. But those are all the passages in which you find a discussion of the whole event from triumphal entry to resurrection. Okay? Bunch of references. And you know what I could do is I can put these links. This is to all the Old Testament passages. And then first day of the week, the Sabbath is the 7th. So the day after the Sabbath is the 1st. Okay, but that link is to all those Old Testament references. And now I will give you a link also to the New Testament references. Those are huge long links in Restream, but they get truncated in YouTube, which is okay. You can still click on them. And the beginning of the year was in the spring. Mid-March to mid-April was the first month of their year. Okay, so anyway, what we get from all those references, if you can see what I got here on the screen, is that on the 10th of the first day of the month, lambs were selected for observation. The 14th was Passover, also a preparation day. You would kill the lamb at twilight on the 14th, which is between the evenings. Eat it that night. So after the evenings, which depending on how you reckon things, may or may not be the next day. Okay? On the 15th was an annual high or great Sabbath, first day of unleavened bread. On the 16th, and this is where it gets really complicated, first fruits, the sacred assemblies, start counting 50 days of Pentecost, including that day. But it's disputed because does it mean the day after the weekly Sabbath during unleavened bread, or does it mean always the 16th? By the 1st century, when Jesus was here, and even, Josephus lived a little, like, he was born, I think, about the time right after Jesus was crucified, somewhere around there. And he was a historian, and he wrote that they always celebrated first fruits on the 16th. But if you look at the Old Testament, it's kind of ambiguous, and it actually leans a little, because it uses the word Sabbath only for the 7th day, that it means the day after that. But again, by Jesus' day, it was being celebrated on the 16th. Just saying. Then the next day might have been the resurrection, whether it was on first fruits or the day after. We're going to look at some charts and see how complicated this is. Then the 20th, no matter what, with the 16th and 17th, no matter how controversial that is, on the 20th is another preparation day. Why? Because the 21st is another no work day, the 7th day of unleavened bread. Everybody on the same page here? Do we have any questions? Because I will show you charts that will help some, maybe. But I just wanted to go over that and get the basics of what we're talking about here. We're talking about Old Testament feasts for Israel, the nation, assuming they're agrarian, as everybody pretty much was. Yes, they had cities, but even the cities had lots of farming around them that everybody participated in. They all knew about raising flocks, and that's how your wealth was measured a lot, how many flocks and how many flocks and herds and crops that you had was, where your wealth came from, and supporting the people. And that's the thing, just to make a short little side trip here, for tithing in Israel, it was food. It was the first and best portion of your food, your increase. Each year you planted so many seeds, you got more plants than that, right? That's your increase. Same with animals. You start with a small flock of animals, and it grows and grows, right? Because they have more than enough to replace themselves. So that increase is what was tithed on. And so all the whole tithing system depends upon farming, not wages and salaries. And the reason was that the priests had no land of their own and needed to be supported, and the poor needed to be supported. So it was kind of a community cupboard sort of thing. So when you give food, you're actually tithing the way the Old Testament, the Hebrews did. But anyway, all of this stuff has to do with that, and they were still doing this sort of thing in Israel in the 1st century. They were still very agrarian. Jesus used many examples and parables from farming, and people taking care of their animals. So a lot of the world's population is a step removed from that now, and have only lived in the cities or suburbs and don't know about these things very well, but at least not by experience. So these systems are geared around that kind of an agrarian society. Anyway, the basics are that there's a first day of the first month of the year in the spring, and it had a very specific list of 3 main feasts, the spring feast, which were all pointing to Jesus' first coming. Okay? So we're going to see when the triumphal entry was the presentation of the Lamb to be observed. The 14th was the day of his being sacrificed. And then unleavened bread, while they were in this wilderness, and he's in the heart of the earth, or the belly of the earth. And then the first fruits would be when he arose. And then 50 days later would be the beginning of the church as well, because that's Pentecost. That's when the Holy Spirit came. So now let's look at some scriptures. Luke 23:54, it was a preparation day, the 20th. Now, this one up here, the Passover, the 14th, okay? That preparation day. And Sabbaton was about to start. That's a singular noun, Sabbath. One Sabbath, because singular and plural in Sabbath is a big deal. You wouldn't call the seventh day of the week Sabbaths, plural. So what we have here is a singular noun, and the preparation, the day we're talking about right here is a preparation before a day of no work. The women who had come from Galilee with Jesus had been following along. They noted the tomb and how his body was placed in it. Then they returned, doesn't say where, and prepared aromatic spices and perfumed oils for the burial. But of course, and this is emphatic in the Greek, they rested on Sabbath according to the commandment. So we seem to be talking about the same 2 days here. The first one was the preparation. It was Passover, the day Jesus was crucified. And the next day was a Sabbath day, a day of no work. And the women couldn't do anything that day. Because not only on a no work day you couldn't work, but by that time it was also a rule that you couldn't walk more than about a mile. You couldn't travel any farther than that. John 19:31, since it was a preparation, the Jews did not want the bodies to remain on the crosses because Sabbaton was impending, that one being, and I won't read off the Greek here for you, the big day, that one Sabbath. Okay? The big day, that one Sabbath. So, this preparation is the day before a very special Sabbath. I think, meaning the one on the 15th, a lot of other people do too. Okay, yeah, Ryan, can you please not distract too much with that? It would be better if you wanted to ask stuff like that, to ask it in the comments under the video instead of in the live stream chat. That would help, okay? There's reasons for things, and it's really not today's topic. So if you want to post questions like that are off topic, please put them under the video instead of in the live stream. So anyway, we got that these two references are saying the preparation day, Passover, was before a very big deal, Sabbath, okay? But make note of this, that is not in line with the Old Testament. The three synoptic Gospels all refer to Passover as the Feast of Unleavened Bread, but we know, we just read, that Feast of Unleavened Bread doesn't start technically till the next day, the 15th. But all three of those passages refer to Passover as a Feast of Unleavened Bread. So already we have a blending and mixing of terminology and not being terribly strict, even in Jesus' day, even by the gospel writers. Okay? Now we're going to take a look at something called Green's literal translation of Matthew 28:1. And I think I gave, no, maybe I didn't give this in the chat. I will go ahead and do that, put that link there. But after the Sabbaths, plural, at the dawning of the first of the Sabbaths, but it really doesn't say first, it says one, is when they went to see the grave. Okay? Back to this. Here's how I see it reading. But latest night of Sabbaths, just before dawn on one of the Sabbaths, because Mian Sabbaton is one Sabbath, of one of Sabbaths. Okay? So it reads, latest night of Sabbaths, which could be at the end of the darkness of Sabbaths, plural, just before dawn on one of those Sabbaths, either the past ones or the one to come, just before dawn, maybe at the very end of that Sabbath, when it starts to, from night to dawn, when it switches from Sabbath to not Sabbath. Very razor edge description here in Matthew 28:1. That's when they went to the tomb. But again, which Sabbath? The weekly Sabbath? The one after, the first day of unleavened bread? Or the day after that, And is that the day, instead of a Sabbath, counting a Sunday for 7 weeks to Pentecost? It gets, like I said, complicated. Mark 16:1, after the Sabbath, they went to the tomb. So here we have a singular Sabbath. In Mark 16:9, when Jesus arose, arising in the fourth watch of the night is what the Greek read of this LBRY means, which is 3 to 6 a.m. on first Sabbath. There we have in Greek the word first. Okay? That's the second pro word. We have pro-e and pro-t. So, very early, fourth watch of the night, 3 to 6 a.m. on first Sabbath. What does that mean? The first of 7, day after the weekly, etc. And then John 21 says, on one of the Sabbaths, plural, Mary Magdalene came by herself to the tomb before dawn while it was still dark, which is telling us there were 2 visits of women to the tomb that morning, which is why there's 2 different, by description, 2 different accounts. Because first Mary Magdalene went by herself. She was the first to see Jesus alive, didn't recognize him at first, and there's a discrepancy in numbers of angels seen and when and where they're seen. The reason is because she went by herself before light began to crack for the day, right? Before the other women. Little things to look for in the text. Is anybody still following along so far? I hope so, because eventually I'm going to need more brains looking at this, because it's hard. And I spent, like I said, at least a week looking at every possible nuance and figure of speech and timing in history as to how people use these phrases. And still, it's unsolvable to me anyway so far. So, what we got here is 3 different scenarios. There are more than 3. But this is my attempt at putting those together. And I don't know how big or small those are appearing on the screen. I guess you can see enough. I can blow this up a bit and see parts of it, or put it back down. But what we have here is scenario 1 is, first of all, assuming that the day started at sunset. There's also a lot of controversy over that. And then the second one here is where you can see where I start the day at sunrise. There's good arguments for it. Okay, yeah, this is confusing. So 2 of these are going to be with days starting at sunset, and the middle one, days starting at sunrise. So the first one I have here is where triumphal entry is here on the 10th. Hopefully you can see my cursor moving around. During the day, of course. And then on the 14th, let me zoom in on that. On the 14th here, hopefully that's big enough to see. And every time I zoom, I have to scooch it over. We know that during the night, it was at the end of a day when the disciples asked, where do you want us to eat the Passover? And that term, the Passover, when it comes to a meal, is kind of murky as well, because there's 2 different days when people talk about wanting to eat the Passover. Hard to say about the calendars, but anyway. When they asked to set that up, the Last Supper was, after the evening. That was the first thing they did at nightfall. After that, they went to the Garden of Gethsemane. Then he was taken to Annas, to Caiaphas. And then when it was just getting to be dawn, they took him to the Sanhedrin. So all this stuff happened in one night. Okay? Then the next day, which was definitely Passover, or at least that part of the day, whether it started here or not. Let's just focus on the days starting at sundown for now. Okay? So he was taken to Pilate, then to Herod, and then back to Pilate. And that took some time. But he was crucified at about noon. It was the third hour, almost about the 6th hour, the two different gospels say. And so they both mean, that noon, just, I've gone over that before, but they both mean it was about noon when he was sentenced and he was put on the cross at noon. Noon to 3 was the unusual darkness while he was on the cross, and then he died at about 3 in the afternoon. Between 3 and sunset, he was buried. The women saw where he was buried, and then it says they went away to prepare spices and then rest on the Sabbath. Which Sabbath? Okay. There was certainly this one on the 15th is no brainer. It was a day of no work. It was the beginning of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, this green bar up here. Okay, and I have shaded this block to show that it's a day of no work. Okay? And that next day, after the 14th, so the 15th, the tomb was sealed. Okay, because they were afraid that his disciples would come and steal his body, so the religious leaders had the tomb sealed with a Roman seal and put a guard in front of it. Was 16th the first fruits? They wouldn't do it during the night. They would do it during the daylight hours. Not sure. According to Josephus, it was always the 16th in that century. Or it could have been the day after the weekly Sabbath, which would put it on the 17th. Okay? So, you got your partial day, full day, so there's 3 days. And we got full night, and then a partial night over here. There's 3 nights. Let me back out just a little bit so I don't keep going back and forth as much. So we have, he's buried by the end of this day, so he was dead for about 3 hours on that day. Daylight, and then nighttime. Also, you could say from his burial, we have the 3rd day. Okay. He arose before, like I said, between 3 and 6 a.m. Probably, I'm going to say closer to 4 a.m., somewhere in there. Mary Magdalene comes in that little sliver there, and then the rest of the women visit the tomb earliest hours. Was that first fruits? But what's this walk thing? And remember, we're still in the Feast of Unleavened Bread through the 21st, which was another no work day, and had a preparation before it. What's this walk? This is when the two walked to Emmaus. Emmaus was about 7 miles from Jerusalem. You couldn't walk that far on a no work day. So, how far could they walk in a day? They had to start their walk after they heard the report from the women. So I'm going to say the latest, somewhere in this block when they left. Okay? I'm just saying about noon because that's probably the latest they left. I can walk around 3 miles an hour. I'm sure they were more used to walking and could cover more distance, but, depending on the terrain. But at least, 2 to 3 hours they could be in Emmaus. And it says, if you read the narratives, that they had arrived at the destination, which was Emmaus, by nightfall. So that's why I put this block where I did, because, they had to walk there. It couldn't have been a no work day, and they got there their trip at nightfall, because Jesus had met up with them, and they said, no, it's getting dark, don't go any farther, come stay with us. And they sat down to eat, and then he was suddenly revealed to them. They didn't know who he was before that, and he disappeared. So they got up at that very hour and went back to Jerusalem. So they're walking during the night back to Jerusalem. Okay, that's the walk from Jerusalem to Emmaus and back to Jerusalem. Okay, so they were busy that night. That's all scenario 1. Okay? So, now let's look at scenario 2, where the days start at sunrise, and this is a viable option. I've read a ton of stuff over the last few weeks, and of course over the last many years, but a lot recently, where people make a good argument for the day starting at sunrise. So I decided to do this chart with the day starting at sunrise and see how that works out. And you can see we still have Jesus dying on the 14th, which is a Passover in preparation, but the Last Supper and all the trials had to have happened on the evening of the 13th. But Jesus called that Last Supper a Passover, but that doesn't even, that works in this scenario, but not in this one. You wouldn't be able to call it the Passover. But it solves other problems. I mean, he's still on trial with Rome during the morning. He's still crucified at noon, died at 3, buried before sunset. And then the women have even more time to prepare spices before they would have to rest on the Sabbath. So it gives them more time to do that. I don't know how long it took to prepare those, but they have very little of that in scenario 1. They have much more in scenario 2. Okay, but they had to rest on the Sabbath. The tomb was sealed, but that Sabbath, like I said, this one we're trying it with the day starting at sunrise. So the 15th is still the first day of unleavened bread. Was the 16th first fruits? Don't know. Was it the 17th, which I have covered up here because I have the 2 walking to Emmaus on that same non-work day. But if the 16th is the first fruits, and if we keep our days and nights and third day, he would have to have arisen very late on what we would call Saturday night, actually Sunday morning, because see, this is where Sunday starts. So he still rises on a Sunday. Okay? Again, this scenario is with days starting at sunrise instead of sunset. So, first fruits, he still rises on first fruits. Here he doesn't, if it's on the 16th, which was the norm in the first century. Here he does rise on first fruits. Okay? The only problem with this scenario, unless first fruits is on the day after the weekly Sabbath, but it's still Sunday here. See what I'm saying? And the 2 can go to and from Emmaus without violating any laws. So like I said, the only problem with this scenario is that the Last Supper happened on the 13th. Is that a problem? I don't know. Now let's look at scenario 3, which I think is probably the weakest of the 3. This is the one I've had for many years, where, like the first one, they still have Last Supper on Passover, because I went back to starting the days at sunset, right? So everything's the same as the first one so far, as far as, but it's an earlier day in the week is all. I have this happening on Wednesday. And then the next day the tomb is sealed, Feast of Unleavened Bread begins, and the women only have this sliver of time to prepare spices. But there's a day between the Sabbaths in which they can buy more, and because one account says that they bought, after the Sabbath, they bought their spices. Some people try to solve this problem by saying they bought them twice, or the first one they didn't buy, they already had them, and then they bought more. So, and then, though, to keep the 3 days and 3 nights, you have to have him rising on a Saturday. But the 2 have to walk to Emmaus that next afternoon, and that's still a non-work day, which is a problem. That's why I called it the weakest scenario. Unless first fruits was this day, in which case it's still a problem if it's on Monday, or actually Sunday, I mean, because it's still a no-work day if it's first fruits. Okay? So, do you see my trilemma here? Since there's a problem with every one of them. It's like that old arcade game of whack-a-mole. You You hammer one down and another pops up. I use that analogy a lot in programming as well. You solve one problem and create another. You tell me. I'm going to back this out a little bit so you can see the three scenarios a little bit better. You tell me, given all those, there are some firm things like we know Passover is the 14th. We know he was crucified at noon, died at 3, buried by sundown. We know the triumphal entry was the 10th. We know the 15th starts unleavened bread and is a no work day. We know there was another Sabbath the weekly Sabbath. And after the Sabbaths, plural, Jesus arose, because that's when the women went to the tomb. So, plural Sabbaths, as far as I can tell, plural is never applied to the weekly Sabbath. Even if it's when you start counting the 7 weeks to Pentecost. If anybody wants to join the panel on Discord and talk about this, or say something in the chat, because that's where I'm stuck. Because I can't make a scenario where all the pieces fit. And it isn't because there's something wrong with Scripture. There's something wrong with our understanding of what was going on in the context, how they were using the phrases, even before the time of Christ. Because, especially during the Babylonian captivity, things got a little muddled. Now, we would have to assume also that Jesus would do things on the required proper day, but we don't know what that actually was by the first century because of the terminology is a little ambiguous. Do you see the problem? Yeah, even one scenario is confusing. Like I said, part of the problem is not knowing when a day starts. Is it sunrise or sunset? Another problem is the term Passover, which could be used for any meal during that week, which by Jesus' time, they were starting to also call Passover the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So, and it wasn't necessarily wrong, it's just what they called stuff. Like we speak of the Christmas season or something like that, or the holiday season. It kind of got that way with Israel in the first century, where they would have this spring feast thing going on, and unleavened bread became kind of a catch-all for all of this stuff going on. But exactly which day of the week it was when they did first fruits, which day of the week it was Saturday or Sunday when Jesus rose, which day of the week from which they start counting the 7 weeks. Yeah, we don't have enough information to completely solve the problem. And if you go looking like I did, you will find very passionate, very well-reasoned cases for every one of these scenarios. So, like I said, Josephus in the 1st and 2nd century stated clearly that first fruits was on the 16th. That's when they were celebrating it. Whether they should have been celebrating it then is another question, but he said that's when they were doing it. Does that mean that's the day that Jesus actually rose? If it was the wrong day? Don't know. And that's the problem. That's why I have first fruits in red on this chart. I'll put this up someday, and right now I was tweaking it this morning before I went to church. So first fruits is red because it's a no work day, but I don't know quite where to put it. Is it always a weekly Sabbath? Is it always the 16th? Is it always the day after the weekly Sabbath, or the day after, the 16th would be the day after the first Sabbath of unleavened bread? The Jews today go by their sages. So whatever the sages, even the Talmud and things like that say, that's what they do. They had problems with this back in Jesus' day. So I don't know if talking to a modern convert from Judaism would help or not, because they don't even have a temple. They don't, whether there's a lot they're not doing that they should be doing. So, like I said, though, by the 1st century, they were already picking the 16th as first fruits. Okay? So, I don't think, Soundlies, it would ever be the 1st of April. That's too early. because it would have to be after the 14th, the middle of their month. It was always, Passover was always a full moon, or thereabouts, because the month started at the new moon, the crescent, just very beginning of the new moon crescent or something like that. So, but, mid-March to mid-April, maybe so. If we knew exactly the year, which we don't know that either, you'd have to pick when there was a new moon or a full moon on the 14th of the first day of the month. Whenever, when that started. So we can't be precise more than a few days. Even getting the year right is somewhat problematic. So, and again, I wouldn't trust the Masons as far as I could throw them or one of their buildings to get a day right. Yes, maybe they happen to. Who knows? But I wouldn't trust them. But we just don't know. But the thing is, about all of this, yes, in some sense it's important because we want to know, that Jesus fulfilled these things. And in the first century there, they would have known exactly what day of the week it was, right? But to Christians, we don't care. Yes, and I did consult many Jewish and Messianic Jewish sources when I looked at this stuff. Jews, non-Jews, practicing, not practicing. All right, thank you, Michael. Good to see you. Sorry about your mind. I mean, this is a puzzle. And yeah, I looked for as many different sources as I could. I looked even for the dreaded Hebrew Roots crowd, the hack, as I did a video on some months ago. They talk about not knowing when to count their omers, their sheaves. Yeah, wouldn't we all have access to the Vatican Library? But you see, the problem is with the information available to me, looking everywhere I can look, regardless of what perspective they're coming from, it's impossible to solve the problem to everybody's satisfaction. We do know that he rose between 3 and 6 a.m. We know that the women were first to the tomb as the daylight was dawning on that day. We know that 2 people walked 7 miles on that day. We know the Passover the 14th, that's when he was crucified, that there was at least 2 Sabbaths between those 2 events. But what day of the week it was, when his first fruits, couldn't settle the question. Okay? So like I said, if any of you are members of my Discord and wanted to hop on and have any insights, now's your big chance. But, and I deliberately didn't make a lot of other material to talk about because I didn't want to fill the hour necessarily, because in case there was somebody that had some insight on this. But like I said, I have looked at every possible thing I could find on it. And I looked at the phrases, when does the day start? Certain things like, for example, first fruits. They wouldn't do that during the night. Okay? They wouldn't do that during the night. So it was a daylight hour when that happened. So at least we know that. Right? And somebody just joined my Discord. So let me give you the reader role. And if you want on panel, I will give you, at least temporarily, the panel role so you can join the panel. Alright, so we'll see if they join or not. But in the meantime, all I can do is assure you that I did my homework, as I try to do always. I'm not sure why the channel's not showing up, Emlu. Might be something to do with the name change that I did several weeks ago. That's all I can guess. But yeah, I mean, I've read a ton of stuff over a ton of years, and even more tons recently. But I think one of the keys is the plural of Sabbath. Is it telling us more than one, or is it saying that it was only plural if they were counting the 7 weeks? Hard to pin down. Okay? So, person who just joined, if you want to get on the panel, go ahead. If you don't, that's fine. But let me know pretty soon, because, I don't know whether I'll keep the stream going or not. I'm just asking more questions and answering, I think. All I'm trying to do is give you the parameters, right? So I go back to this for a little bit. I put all links to these references earlier in the chat. But again, here's this little chart here is what we know. The 10th, the lambs were selected. The 14th was Passover, also preparation. You had to kill the lamb at twilight, which is between the evenings, which is between sundown and latest light. And you had to eat it that night. So you were obviously eating it after sundown, after the light was all gone, eating it on a night. So technically, is that the next day? It would be if the days started at sundown. If they don't start at sundown, then it isn't. So you tell me. First fruits may or may not have been the 16th always, or waiting till the day after the weekly Sabbath in unleavened bread week. Then the resurrection on the 3rd day, another preparation day before the 21st. That's what we know. We know when Sabbath is singular. Okay, the day that we're talking about a Sabbath coming after preparation, which would be the 15th, which is not in dispute. So a high Sabbath, as John 19:31 is very specific, the big day, that one Sabbath. That's what the preparation, that particular Sabbath. So Luke 23:54 through 56 and John 19:31 are in agreement that there was one Sabbath coming. But Matthew 28:1 says latest night of Sabbath just before dawn on one of the Sabbaths. Those are the key phrases I kept looking at and trying to work out with different scenarios. And the women come to the tomb after a Sabbath. Jesus rose on 3 to 6 a.m. on first Sabbath. That's where, like I said, I would highlight the word first. First Sabbath appeared first to Mary. Because we got 3 firsts in this verse. See, proe, proti, and proton. We got 3 words for first in that verse. But others don't say first. They say one. Is. That's why it's confusing. Then we have John 21 on one of the Sabbaths. So I think it's pretty guaranteed there were at least 2 Sabbaths that week. Whether they were back to back or not is another question. Whether Jesus rose on a Sabbath or after a Sabbath, and when was first fruits done, these are all unanswerable questions. I just don't see anybody solving it anytime soon. And like I said, you can find one person who seems really knowledgeable, and you read and you listen and you go, yep, you got it. The days start at such and such time, and this is how it all works out. And you can find another person with a completely different scenario who reaches a different conclusion and is just as knowledgeable and just as passionate about it. So what do you do in that case? What do you do when people who are knowledgeable and passionate and faithful come to totally different conclusions on this? You tell me how that problem is solved. All right? So, I don't know. Anybody got any ideas? Person who joined my Discord, like I said, you do have the role to join the live stream if you want. If you don't want, that's fine. I can take the role away if you aren't interested in being on panel. So just let me know there in the chat on Discord. But like I said, all I can tell you is that I tried. I looked up a whole bunch of stuff. I didn't care what their ideology was. I cared whether they had a good, solid argument, whether they were trying, whether they were looking at the Greek and Hebrew words, finding their usage in literature at the time, and putting forth a good argument. That's all I cared about when I did this. And I'm telling you, I don't have a solution. I find them all intriguing in one way or another. And like I said, the only problem with the center one is that it has Last Supper on the 13th. Welcome to panel. Oh, and he's gone already. The Matrix Media guy. I don't know if he just didn't want to be on the live stream. But anyway, the option is still open. So, unless somebody has something else to add, all I'll say is that I don't know what I'm doing next week. Like I said, I've gone through the entire Bible, half-hour videos at a time. I've done topical studies, so you guys are going to have to tell me, to speak to me, what do you want me to go over next week, unless I come up with something. So, that's all I can tell you. All right, Matrix will be on another time. He says he's at work and can't join right now. So, I don't know what I'll do next week. If I come up with some intriguing puzzle, I'll do that. Otherwise, if there's something I haven't gone over in a while that you'd like a re-look at, I can always do prophecy. That's something I can always come back to. But I do want to also cover the Hebrew roots issue again sometime, even though I'm not sure how long it was. I'll have to look at my own videos and see when I did that. Because it's such a problem. Not something we're afraid of, but something that is leading people astray, and we need to deal with it. But I will get to that eventually on Tuesday night, so I'm not sure I want to cover it also on Sunday. We'll see. So, but yeah, you're welcome. I mean, like I said though, as hard as I try, I don't have enough information to seal this. The two witnesses, sure. I would also ask if you put suggestions for next week under the video, because I'm more likely to remember them that way, because the live chat I don't look at again. Who is the angel of the armies of the Lord that Joshua ran into, the one who didn't rebuke him? If he bowed down, he was probably angel of the Lord, as we know, is a phrase that is at least sometimes used for a theophany in the Old Testament, which is probably Jesus, pre-incarnate, would just be my offhand answer to that. But yeah, two prophecies, two witnesses. Yeah, just like I said, remind me, put it in the comments under the video. Yeah, sorry about that's the cost of being a good link poster is you don't always get to listen. Sorry about that. So, but yeah, we're close enough to our hour, and I've stretched it enough. But like I said, we'll see what we're going to do next week. And if you have any interesting links on this topic about, the timing of these things, let me know. But again, as I was starting to say before, and I got myself sidetracked, in the end, this doesn't matter to Christians, because we're not trying to count weeks. We don't have a sacred calendar. We don't have sacred days. Romans 14 says one person considers one day more special than another considers all days alike. Let each one follow their personal conviction. So, in the end, we don't even have a worship day specified. We don't have a worship method specified. We don't have a place specified. We don't have officials specified. We don't have a sacred calendar. We don't have a sacred temple. The churches are not such. Jesus just said, whenever 2 or 3 of you meet because of me, then there I am. So it's a sacred place because 2 or 3 meeting, not because of the building or anything like that. So in the end, this controversial stuff is just that. It's not something that we should be concerned about. It's, I didn't spend a lot of time studying it, but it doesn't, in the end, affect our faith in the slightest, or our practice in the slightest, because we're not observing first fruits. We're not observing Passover. We're not doing unleavened bread. Those things were all fulfilled in Jesus' first coming. And he didn't even tell us, nobody in the New Testament tells us, remember the day of Jesus' birth, or the day of his death, or the day of his ascension. All it says is, remember me. You know, remember me. That's all it says. It doesn't say what day. If God wanted us to know a specific day in the New Testament for anything we're supposed to do, he would have told us. Didn't tell us. So, back to Romans 14. A matter of personal conviction. So don't worry about what day it is. This isn't something to worry about. This is just something interesting. And in the process of researching it, you learn the Bible better because you're looking up the meanings of words. You're doing word studies, you're doing idiom studies, which is, figures of speech in a particular language and time and culture. You're studying, what the meaning of the feast was. So it has value. It's just that if you can't figure it out, don't worry about it. So, yeah, if it was something God wanted us to know, we would know it. And people's personal convictions clash on this. People's studies and research and sincere conclusions clash. And that alone should tell us something. What can we do? So, I'm going to stop it there. Try to hit all the buttons in the right order again. But thanks for coming. And we'll see if we can do some prophecy centering on the two witnesses next week. I will try to remember that. And again, thanks for coming. Everybody take care. And we'll see you another time. And remember, I also run on Tuesday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern.